Hi there, everyone. Welcome to lecture 1C of my fourth series of lockdown lectures. The odd numbers are trying to keep it in touch with my original mandate in giving these lectures at a Bible college, where I was doing 14 3-hour sessions over over 2 terms. That'll just help me from getting confused if I come back to this particular series in future. I'm doing this work in partnership with Discipling Nations, and my intention is selfish in one sense. I want to revisit some of the important issues that I face and have faced in my life, and to rethink some of the bigger picture issues. And I'm hoping that as I do this, that these online presentations will be helpful to you as you consider how you are involved with God's mission in Africa and beyond. So, lecture 1C of Jesus and Africa, 2,000 years of the church on the continent. Now, my contention that I've been working at in the last 2 days, and that I'll carry on with today, is that Christianity has come to Africa. It's spread, it's grown, it's now been taken out by Africans to the rest of the world against 20 centuries of plunder. People have wanted Africa stuff. And the question is in what way has this plundering, the sense of taking and taking, influenced the Christianity that we see in Africa? And in what ways has the church and the growing kingdom of God in Africa kicked back against that greed and rapaciousness? And we'll work that out in the rest of the lectures, but I think it's very important to look and take a close look at the background against which Christian mission has happened in Africa. Now, we've looked at the Phoenicians, we've looked at the Romans and the Christian Romans, we've looked at the Arabs and the Western invasion of Africa, the slicing and dicing of Africa for gain, the plundering of Africa. Today we're going to look at the most recent invasion and colonization of Africa, and I would call it globalization. It is a techno invasion in my view. I'm drawing on the insights of Elzeby Loots, who's a professor of economics at Northwestern University. Well, she was 10 years ago when I first prepared this material, but it's still valid for today. Let's introduce you to Elzeby Loots. There we go. Now, the way she reads the economics of globalization is that it's an increased incapacity. I can shop for anything anywhere in the world. I pay less tax on what I buy. I can manufacture and sell things wherever I want to in the world. And transnational companies have more and more power. And she asked the question, who benefits? And she says the process of globalization is a very uneven process with a relatively small number of countries benefiting from this process. A relatively small number of countries benefiting from this process. She says that in Africa, the only country to benefit from globalization is South Africa, and they're not much. I think I might disagree with her on that point. I think that the at the four corners of Africa, we've got four nation states that benefit from globalization to some degree. In the north, Egypt; in the west of Africa, the Nigeria; in the east, Kenya; and in the south, South Africa. The four big players in Africa on the globalization market. But now, why do I call this techno-colonialism? It's because I believe that there's a real threat here, and that we're in danger of the dangers of exploitation outweighing the advantages of the technology. The roads we inherited from the British colonial invasion and occupation of South Africa, the railways and the infrastructure, it's a big advantage. But they were designed to move troops around and move products out. It's only a coincidental advantage. Now, what is the advantage of globalization for Africa? Are there ways people in Africa can control the power of multinational technology companies? It's very important, and it's here that the church, being itself a multinational organization, has a role to play, because we potentially have the power to influence the amount of damage caused by the latest globalization invasion. Now, there are two main areas that I'd like to draw to your attention that you might not have thought of. Of course, you might have thought of them, but I think these are important for us to consider. I'm going to switch back to the slides now and look at our first one, which is debt and the money flow from Africa. This little thing, I struggle with my fat fingers. Right, let's focus for a moment on the money. As they say in detective fiction, if there's a corpse and you need to solve a murder, ask questions about the money. Now, our total debt, Africa's total debt, is about 200 billion, and loan repayments on that come to about 11 billion a year. And of course, we're taking out new loans, God help us, X number of dollars, X billion number of dollars per year. And so our loan repayment is 11 billion plus whatever new loan repayments we're doing. It's horrendous. The net flow, just going back to that one, the net flow of money is out of Africa, not into Africa. We might be getting a lot of aid and foreign direct investment, but the loan repayments are this huge sump into which our money from Africa sinks. Where does it go? It goes to the old money, goes to the lenders, the Western nations. Another interesting thing is the whole issue of odious debt. You know, when the World Bank lends to an African country and then a dictator just steals that money and stashes it in the Panama or Switzerland or some other respectable place where thieves of huge amounts of money can hide their ill-gotten gains. Now, the odious debt, that money that's been stolen, specifically by dictating elites, amounts to estimates, it amounts to $274 billion. Now, if our total debt is about 200 billion, that would like pay it off in a day. But it's not being paid off, is it?
And those guys were mostly supported by the West.
Yeah. South Africa had to keep paying interest on an 850 million IMF loan taken by the apartheid government until 1998. Can you fathom that? De Klerk's 850 million loan to shore up the apartheid government when it had gone bankrupt had to be repaid by Mandela's new government. It's shocking, and Africa finds itself in this sort of situation over and over again. Now, the second area is the area of multinational plunderers. They also take our stuff. The new scramble for Africa is, I should just stay with the slides here because I've got lots of maps and charts. The new scramble for Africa is not so much about territory, because the capabilities in warfare have become transnational, so we don't need territory as such, but it's about commodities. Here's a new way of dividing Africa. Look at that. The whole of Angola and Namibia and the Central African Republic has been reduced to diamonds, cobalt, and fish. South Africa reduced to gold. East Africa reduced to gold and petroleum and natural gas. Oh, uranium there too in East Africa. Just about the whole of North Africa reduced to petroleum. Do you see what's happening? It's the same sort of reductionism that happened under colonial parceling of Africa. Let's have a look at Shell Oil in Nigeria. A little bit of a closer look at Shell Oil in Nigeria as an example of this. Here's a lady hanging out her washing on oil pipelines. I found that a very evocative image. Now, 70% of Nigerians live below the poverty line, but Shell Oil earns $30 billion in revenue a year. Now then, to put that into perspective, the gross national product of Nigeria is 321 billion. It's huge, but the income of Shell in Nigeria is like disproportionate. And where does the money go? I'm sure they pay as little taxes as they can. That's how the game is played. So most of that money will go to those offshore accounts out of Africa. Money moving via resources out of Africa. The plundering of Africa. Now there was this article in The Guardian, and Guardian is fairly responsible in its reporting, where the reporting that the Shell's top executive in Nigeria told US diplomats that Shell had seconded employees of Shell to every relevant department in the government, and so knew everything that was being done in those ministries. A whole spy network in the government. Well, it's not... I guess you'd have to ask if it's true or false, but it's certainly very plausible, because with great money comes great potential to corrupt. Another case would be South African iron. Iron is a very ordinary, basic resource, isn't it? It's not something shiny like gold. I mean, it does shine, but we don't value it for its shine. Although I do have a steel bracelet, not very shiny. We produce about 50 million tons of iron ore every year, of which 30 million are just exported in the ore form, as iron still in rock. China gets 40% of it, Japan gets 25% of it, and Germany gets 20% of it. What's going on? Why are we losing, why is the net flow of treasure, beautiful iron, why is it flowing out of the country? Why aren't we smelting? Why aren't we producing steel? Why aren't we producing steel products? We buy the cars back from Japan, and they more than make up for their investment in in iron ore in South Africa. And then the third one, after the multinationals, is China and India. Other players like that, but there's Russia, there's always the United States, there's the European bloc. Let me show you a picture here of the Nanhua Chinese temple in Bronkhorstspruit. Have you ever been to Bronkhorstspruit? Leslie and I have. Come on, I'm trying to push this button. There you go, there's a nice picture of it. It's a huge, sprawling Chinese temple complex where Chinese nationals can go and pray for success. The way it works is you promise a certain offering if you get a certain success in gambling or in business. And when you achieve that success, then you pay your money, and that, my goodness, that money has so far enabled the building of an immense complex. And Chinese direct foreign investment in Africa is huge. We're in the 5 billion to 10 billion range here in South Africa. See that Nigeria is more than 10 billion. Algeria is in the same range as South Africa. Kenya is in the same range there, 1 billion to 5 billion as Angola and Madagascar. There's a huge amount of money poured into investment in Africa, and that's always priming the pump for money to move out. And as a very wise woman says, Jane Goodall, I don't know if you recognize her, she says, in Africa, China is merely doing what the colonialists did. They want raw materials for their economic growth, just as the colonialists were going into Africa and taking away the natural resources, leaving people poorer. I think she's onto something there. I came across this quotation in the Times of India. It's hard to swallow. And in this editorial, they said, as China sweeps through Africa with an insatiable appetite for resources, India and US plan to join forces in that continent to offer what they believe is a credible alternative. Boy, let's just think about that. So, you've got to ask the question, do the USA and India then not have an insatiable appetite for resources? And to whom would this more credible... Oh dear, there are lots of things we need to think about. And newspapers can sometimes write a lot of junk. I mean, look at India. Everyone wants a bit of the African pie. This is Africa-India bilateral trade volume. And lo and behold, looks like South Africa has above $8 billion per year moving from between Africa and India, and in India's advantage. Nigeria too, same level. Kenya and Tanzania, 3 to 6 billion. India's becoming a greater player, and the tune's the same. Get what you can out of the African continent. Everyone wants treasure from the African treasure chest. And the common theme is greed and exploitation. And there's a story that's going around which says, when you missionaries came, we had the land and you had the Bible. And then you said, close your eyes and let us pray. And when we opened our eyes, lo and behold, we had the Bible and you had the land. Right. Has anything changed? And has the dynamic of religion as the chaplain of invasion diminished? We've got to ask ourselves in what ways Christian mission has been corrupted by the mindset of arrogance and greed. And we will look at that quite carefully in the lectures ahead. Is mission theft from the praying man? Has Jesus in Africa escaped this latest colonial trap? We'll look at these issues further as we go along. I found this in my reading, this quotation in my reading this morning. I'm very pleased to have found this source. He's Fantu Cheru, and he's an economist. And he wrote a book called African Renaissance. And he says, I propose a third option, the guided embrace of globalization with a commitment to resistance. Now, isn't that interesting? Not a resistance, complete resistance to globalization, that would be futile. Not a servile acceptance of globalization on the terms of others, but globalization with a commitment to resistance. African countries must be prepared to come up with alternative formulations and conditions under which they will engage in global economic exchanges. I think that's a very wise and helpful thing to say. We are in the midst of huge forces, but we have the capacity to resist. And we need to be wise in the way we resist. Well, that's it for today. Tomorrow we'll continue with looking at that individual actions and more in depth at the nuts and bolts of how Christianity moved in and through Africa from the early days. I'd like to do this survey of the plundering of Africa first, because we need to be realistic in our understanding of Christianity, the movement of Christianity. It wasn't only the spiritual awakening of many millions of people. It was also, it came in the form of many compromises that had to be made with other forces at work that were not intended to be of any advantage to Africa. So let's pray. Dear Father, help us to imagine what your church might have been like, and to imagine the good that you might have done, that we might have done. Give us the courage to bring the church now to that place of grace. Amen. Right. If this is important, if this is valid, if this is true, then please try and take this material out. Discuss it with other people. Let's get a conversation going. I had very interesting feedback yesterday. That's really helped me to orientate myself in terms of aligning with aspirations of local people in Africa. And I really value that. Now, I can give you these slides. They're available to you for free. There is no money is changing hands in this transaction. But I would like information to change hands, and I'm a learner here too. And of course, when we get down through the levels of lockdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, when we're in zero lockdown, and under the grace of God, we'll get there one day. You could invite Discipling Nations to run this course, although it's a monster course. We also do we also do shorter courses to help your church as it considers how it should respond to the situation in Africa and beyond. That's all for today. In the meantime, stay soapy.